From Fox News, it's The Campaign with Bret Baier.
As the United States reached more than 4.6 million cases of COVID-19 and 154,000 deaths, on Sunday, White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx said the country is in a, quote, new phase of the pandemic. As the virus remains a threat, obviously, to the American public and health, in Washington, leadership is struggling to come to an agreement on a new stimulus package. The sticking point for Democratic leadership is on maintaining the $600 enhanced unemployment benefits, while Republicans want it lowered to ensure the $600 a week does not prevent Americans from going back to work. As the negotiations stall, the Trump administration is reportedly considering taking unilateral action on enhanced unemployment and eviction moratoriums if Congress is unable to come to an agreement. Our socially distant panel is anxiously awaiting to discuss this and the campaign. But first, Fox News correspondent Peter Doocy gives us an update from the campaign trail.
Joe Biden is home in Delaware this week trying to pick someone to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. And his wife tells Fox he's almost there.
Yep, we're close.
Okay, well.
He's close.
Joe Biden does not have any public events or private events to start the week, even though he told donors on Monday, we're going to keep campaigning as aggressively as possible. We're going to need as many pathways to victory as we're going to get. Biden also says that every race he runs, he assumes that he is losing, and he never assumes he is winning. But right now, he's leading in most national and battleground state polls, and the campaign is sending new staff to battleground states, including Texas, but most of their events remain online only. And the next thing we know about on Biden's schedule as an in-person event is his acceptance speech at the Milwaukee convention in less than 2 weeks. The Trump campaign has been trying to pressure Biden to agree to an extra debate and an earlier debate, since early voting starts before their first showdown. But that's not going to happen. A Biden campaign spokesman tells Fox, Joe Biden said in June that he looks forward to debating Donald Trump on the dates and in the locations chosen by the Presidential Commission on Debates. We are still waiting for Donald Trump to agree to as much. The president has flirted with the idea of skipping the debates in the past, but his campaign tells Fox News that's not going to happen. He'll be there. In Wilmington, Delaware, Peter Doocy, Fox News.
Peter, thanks. The latest polls show former Vice President Joe Biden and President Trump polling nearly even in some key battleground states like North Carolina and Georgia, traditionally Republican-leaning. The polls recently paint a more difficult path for re-election for President Trump across the board. Meanwhile, the mystery around former Vice President Joe Biden's VP pick remains as the rescheduled Democratic National Convention approaches and candidates on his short list continue to appear in the public eye to make their case. We'll start there with our panel, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics, Tom Bevan, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Byron York, and Fox News politics editor, Chris Stirewalt. Chris, we were talking on a call and saying, maybe this is some grand strategy, to look at the shiny thing with these VP picks who are out there talking, and in reality, it's none of them. And Michelle Obama comes out of the door and says, I will be VP pick, and let's get this thing over with.
Followed immediately by Wonder Woman. I think Occam's razor applies here. It's more likely to be Kamala Harris than somebody else. I think there's been a lot of staging efforts on the part of the Biden campaign to try to imbue what is sort of the obvious choice with some drama, leaks about the friction with Chris Dodd, who heads up the committee, and their enthusiasm for ambitious women, and all of that stuff may have been a piece of that. But other than Harris, only Tammy Duckworth appears to be somebody on that list who meets the first and most important criteria for Joe Biden, which is could become president and is a political asset, not a detraction, and could reasonably be seen as a person who could become president on day one. But in the meantime, I guess we can say Biden is getting a lot of fundraising and a lot of surrogate work out of a lot of people who think they're on that short list.
Tom, a lot of people looked to Karen Bass, the congresswoman from California, and they said she checks a lot of boxes, and she has an interesting history and the Congressional Black Caucus. And then this story comes out and reminds people of her activities about supporting Fidel Castro, wishing him, well after he died, and kind of some of her past Cuba statements that really would be a problem in Florida.
Yes, and it took about 2 hours for her past comments on Castro to surface, and another 2 hours for a video of her, christening a Scientology building in her district back, 10 years ago. I think that speaks to the point Chris made, the creation of drama, but also I do think that each of these candidates has flaws, and they are aggressively sort of pointing out each other's flaws. And I think that's in part because this vice presidential pick is seen within the party as being that consequential, that Joe Biden is merely going to be a placeholder or a transitional figure, and that whoever he picks is going to be the nominal leader of the Democratic Party and the presumptive frontrunner in 2024.
Byron, your thoughts?
Well, I'll say it again. The reason it is so consequential, of course, is that Biden is so old for a president. He would take office at age 78, far older than anybody's ever taken office. One name we haven't mentioned is Susan Rice, who doesn't seem to be a very viable candidate, having never served an elective office anymore before, but she does have the advantage of actually having worked with Biden, was a top official in the Obama White House, National Security Advisor, and ambassador to the U.S. And one of the things about almost all of the other choices is that Biden really doesn't have that personal connection that he values so much with any of them. Kamala Harris being a product of the U.S. Senate, I think that stands very high in Biden's mind. He spent 36 years there. He thinks like a senator. So I think that gives her some advantage there. I agree with Chris that Harris has been the front runner the whole way. But it is interesting that this thing is dragging out a little bit.
It is. And, people who say that they put out that they were going to make a decision this week. Well, he could make a decision, but they're going to announce it next week. The bottom line, to Chris's point, I think this is all designed to give a little bit of juice heading into what a convention. We don't know what it's going to look like. We know it's not going to be packed to the rafters with people and balloons, but they're going to have some programming, Chris.
Yeah, and the American political convention has been a quasi-meaningless activity, basically an infomercial for these parties for a long time, for decades. And this, one begins to wonder that given the way that the parties pick their nominees, is this the end of conventions as we knew them? There's a strong impulse for the parties to want to get together, but really this comes down to a television production job. Who can produce the hashtag content and how can they produce it in such a way that is compelling, that makes it into the news so that you're playing it on special report, 1 week after another. Who can do that job? Trump is quite a television producer. There's no question about it. He has the experience in the field in a way that no president ever has. But Democrats have a lot of people from Hollywood. Democrats have a lot of people who are slick at this stuff. So I think the goal is going to be to try to create something that feels like is slick but authentic at the same time.
It's going to be like those NBA games, if you watched them, where they have the virtual fans. I mean, it looks like a video game practically. It does not feel – it feels like a simulated event, really. And I suspect the conventions are going to have a bit of that to it.
You think they're going to add digital delegates, like with signs and balloons and like funny hats?
Not necessarily, although they might, but I just think it's going to be unlike anything that to Chris's point, they're going to try and replicate what we're used to, what we've been used to for the past, decades with the balloons and the cheers and all of that, but without having any of that live. And so it's going to be a very odd it's going to be a really odd experience, as has been almost this entire campaign.
Well, I'll share some inside baseball here. We are going with a much smaller footprint, and we're going to Milwaukee. Martha and I will be anchoring coverage from there each night and our respective shows. Very small footprint for Fox, but I think we're the only anchors actually going from any network that I've seen so far, number one. Number two, we had our tickets to Jacksonville. Now we shifted to Charlotte, but I don't know where we're going to be for the RNC convention when the president accepts the nomination. He may be at the White House.
Wasn't that a great line? It was in the press conference last week, and Trump is asked, where are you going to give your acceptance address? And he says, well, we'll be going to Charlotte. So they said, oh, okay, so you'll be physically in Charlotte when you give your acceptance address. He said, no, we're working on that. We'll announce it next week. Anybody got any ideas?
To listen to more of the campaign, go to foxnewspodcast.com.